This is kind of a three-part presentation. The first part is kind of the mood of the island when we were getting started, 2000 to 2002. And then those very early meetings, what happened in them. And then kind of the stuff that we were able to do as I went back through the minutes. My notes are in terrible shape because I had them all nicely outlined, but the more I read the minutes, I said, oh, I gotta mention this, tuck it over here, like write this over here. So if things aren't quite in sequence, excuse me, the minutes became so rich going back at them. It's just stuff that I tucked away in ancient history in my brain. So I kept discovering all the stuff. I said, oh, I gotta share this with it because it's interesting. So those first couple of years, Boots and I moved to the island in end of '99, when the house was almost done. And for that first year or so, I kept hearing stories from different people, just running into people on the ferry and so on, hear stories, as I'm sure you do all the time, about things that have to do with Guaymas, some past piece of history, something funny, something about the island that people might not know if you're a newcomer and so on, right? We all, in our early days, have gone through this. And I came with a background in history. You know, I've studied history, all of levels of education, that's my field. And I've always been fascinated with origins. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's how the biblical story got started, or pre-Hispanic art in Mexico, or the history of my own hometown in Connecticut, which I began to research years ago and wrote a play about for our bicentennial. Origins of how places got started has always just fascinated me. So I began hearing these stories and get interested. I'm wondering, well, where can I go and read these stories? Because they've got to be written down somewhere. The answer was, they aren't. They're just oral history. And knowing how oral history can get skewed and forgotten, if you don't write it down, so we don't, you know the whole story about prehistory, and then when we started writing history and how we have different, we know different stuff because stuff got written down somewhere along the line. So I kept asking about this. I said, where do I get to know more about the history? And I kept hearing one phrase over and over again. Well, Winnie Anderson has collected a lot of stuff. He's got a lot of things he's collected from the island. He's got a lot of stories. I kept hearing that over and over again. So sometime in that first year, 2001, I saw it win out. Does anyone remember, when was the store being built? What years?
It was before that.
See, we're all, if we don't have it written down, we're all loose on this stuff.
It was definitely here in
It's in
2003.
cement down there, it's in cement,
Right.
when they
Was it
completed
in the works then, 2001?
Oh, I would imagine it was definitely open in
Or was it later
2003.
than that?
It was open in 2001, so it began.
Okay,
And it
so,
took like
so
3 or 5 years.
so
to
the
get
store was
that.
being built that
Yeah.
year probably. And so I would meet him at the store as things were going on until it got open. We kind of gabbed, and the idea began to develop, and we finished building our house. And I was ready to take on something here beyond just some stuff at the church. I wanted to get involved in the island. So there seemed to be some growing interest of people he knew and that I'd come to meet in starting some kind of a group that had something to do with history by about the end of 2001. At the same time, a young man arrived from Lesley College in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on island doing a student project. I believe, do you remember Alex Dunn? Was he with the Historical Society in Anacortes?
I'm not
I
sure.
think he was
Yeah.
somehow under them. He was doing some kind of student field work of organizing, and his field was history. So he started talking to some people. He got a few people interested. And when we learned about each other, we sort of merged our two endeavors, the groups that Win and I were talking with and he was talking with. And he actually chaired or ran the first couple of meetings we had. And Win and I looked at him and said, hey, enthusiastic young man, he's doing this for credit back at college. let him have at it. So he kind of put together the first 2 or 3 meetings we had, and then eventually had to go back to his school to continue his education in the fall. So the first meeting I have any notes of, and I have a lot, probably a dozen sheets of paper that look like this. Okay, from different gatherings and meetings, I go home and make some notes. This says, April 10th, GIHS. When did I make these notes? One thing I learned from Wynn was always date a page when you do it. Okay. But I'm guessing from this, because we were talking about the unveiling of the Charlie Gant thing in the store, and the display cases, I think it's somewhere around 2007, the best I guess, and early in Wynn's presidency, which followed mine. So, but I've got a lot of pages like this that I can try to sleuth. Is this stuff, can I just go, or just something valuable on here I don't want to lose for our history and our archives. So, that was what, Wynn taught me, date everything. I'm grateful to him for that.
Yeah, right.
With the year too.
A year or two as well.
Yeah. So, by the way, interrupt. Questions, we'll do a Q&A at the end briefly, but if you've got questions as I'm talking, just interrupt, because this is not a formal kind of thing. Just kind of my notes. The first meeting I have any notes of is January 2002. It was an informal meeting, and I have some notes, handwritten notes, I believe, are the notes of that meeting. And we remembered that there were some bodies of history around this person called Bubble. And there was some stuff around that on the island. And there was something called a Gertie Howard scrapbook that, Janice, did you have that?
Well, we have a lot of Gertie's photos, but
Okay, so, and we began to identify stuff that was here. We knew we had to check with the Whatcom Historical Society and the Anacortes Historical Society to see how their models stacked up in terms of collecting things and preserving stuff. And is there a model we should use, or should we adapt our own, and so on. And we had to work through that whole thing of what kind of process are we going to use. A lot of process stuff. And then we had another meeting in April, very informal meeting. And by May 19th, we called for not the first meeting of the Historical Society, but a public forum on forming a historical society. So that's really our anniversary date, is this month, the 19th. So we're 10 days ahead tonight of that anniversary. The thing that amazed me.
Excuse me, Bob, where was that held? Was that held here in the church, or was it at the community center? Do you
A couple of
remember?
them were held at the store, now as I
Oh,
remember.
okay.
But that middle meeting in April, I think, was held at the store. Yeah, I think it was held here at the church. Most of our meetings we used the hall, I think, mainly for memories nights and big public
Okay.
events, but for meetings, I think we've always met here. And the church, has, of course, all along has been very generous to us for preserving stuff. We'll get into that. So we began to start writing down what we had, what we knew we had, and I was amazed to discover on this particular initial group a phenomenon that I've only seen one other time in my involvement with groups on Guaymas. That was when the Tide group first met to publish the Tide. We were going to do a new newsletter, and everybody came out of the woodwork that wanted to do a newsletter. Is within that group, we had every skill and experience we needed to do the job. It's just amazing. Makes me not believe in coincidence. Just there's something going on bigger than us. Okay, whatever, however you envision that. But we had secretaries, we had librarians, we had people who knew, like, what's her name? Carden? They moved off the island.
Oh,
Matt Buckman and,
Nanette?
what was his wife's name?
Nanette,
Nanette Carden. She knew how to do the cataloging stuff. So whenever we came up with a need, It seemed like we had somebody in the group who knew how to do it, or had done it before. Just like Tide, we had newsletter publishers, we had editors, we had everything we need. So this island is rich with resources. The issue is, how do you cultivate them? And this is an issue for us right now.
Mhm.
How do you cultivate people with certain interests and skills that make something function? The pandemic has done a lot of damage, as you know, to a lot of stuff. And so we're kind of regrouping, and this is our first time to kind of start doing that. But I'm convinced, for the Historical Society, or for a newsletter, or for GIHS, or any of them, the talents are here. The new arts initiative on this island, under GIHS, has proven that, right? I'm involved in that. I mean, look at the talent that's come out for posters and organizing and websites and everything else. It's incredibly good stuff. So let's take some, from this early experience, I want to take some learning about how rich the island is, and that we can count on the fact that there are people here, we just have to find them and not lose heart. So, one of the first things we did was we started some work committees. Early ones were 4th of July parade, presence in that. Oral history group, memory nights, and I think you, Janice, and Dawn Ashback were on one of the first ones. And collecting photos and documents. Those are kind of our first 4 major committees. And we began to develop a need for a computer, and we talked about how that would work. And we started to talk with the Anacortes Museum, and when we ultimately put our procedures together, we made a collections process and identification numbers and cataloging to fit the Anacortes Museum. Because we figured if ever this small group suddenly dissolved, everything would just fit in the Anacortes Museum. It wouldn't have to be recatalogued, relabeled, all that stuff. So we just used their system with a few adaptations for our own. Any questions so far?
I found some photos and documents that have an ID number on them. Where did that master list go? Is that around somewhere?
Put your mask down for a second if you've got.
Okay, I found some photos and stuff that are on papers and stuff, and they have an ID number on them. But I don't know where those are located. Where did we put them into a system someplace, or is there a master list of those documents
You
with?
know who would hear, and she's long gone, is Ned Carden, would be the one who would know. She helped us dovetail that all together.
Okay.
I was not heavily, I was involved in more project stuff and less in the internal organization of things, so I don't have the answer to that.
Okay.
But there's maybe somebody who does know.
Maybe Carl might know.
Maybe it's in our new, I haven't come across it in a minute. We planned, there were some stories, we planned those memory nights, you remember those? You had the first one, I've got some stuff here from it. I have this stuff. These are the first 2 memory nights. September 15th, 2002, and April 27th, 2003, and the one in the fall of 2003, for which I have nothing in my files except a note in 2003 minutes. So if anybody has any of the stuff from the third, because we obviously held it, and we have a topic. The first one was pretty much about land, the land and the area, farming and so on. You know what the second one was about? The nefarious side of Guaymas. Pirates, moonshine people, all the kind of edgy stuff that happened there with. And I remember a couple of stories from that I have to share with you. One story, I think, was a Glenn Veal story when they were kids. They kept going by this house after school every day. They'd see this man standing in the kitchen through the window. And every day, he was standing in the same place. By the third day, they began to get suspicious, and there was something maybe not right. They told their folks. Folks went and investigated. He'd hung himself. Remember that story?
I don't remember
Huh?
that story.
I've
I only,
He
yeah.
hung himself, and he was in the same place every day. But some of the kids will finally report that to their folks. Other stories. Oh, Jane throwing the irons down the well. Love that story, and the electricity
She
coming
got
out.
electricity.
Yeah.
And then the wonderful story, you remember the story about why they never caught the moonshiners on island? The feds never caught them? You know that story? Because whoever was bringing the stuff in the milk cans to the top of the rise in the back of the wagon would watch for the ferry coming in, and if there were revenuers on board, there was a special signal, the captain on the horn of a ferry, to say, no, the revenuers on board, go home. So the revenuers never knew why they could never catch the moonshiners on Grimace Island. So we had those kind of stories that came out of that first meeting, that second meeting. All the meetings, and I remember Marv Schultz, and not say anything for the whole thing. But he didn't like to talk in public, and he had to be almost Shanghai to even get there, so I remember. And at one point, they finally asked Marv a direct question. And he came out with about a 5-word answer that absolutely brought down the house. I don't remember what the answer was. But it was just that wonderful moment where one of our beloved elders just said something that just hit everybody. And those were remember those, any of you that those, remember those meetings? They were wonderful meetings. Maybe it's something we ought to kind of resurrect. But if anybody got stuff on that third memories night, I just have not yet, although I've only gotten thoroughly through 2003. So maybe I'll come across some stuff. I've got a file box about this big for the Historical Society. And I have a lot more to go through. And we're trying to get that, and Tom will tell you about the digital process later. We want to get this stuff all in permanent form. Okay. We did a lot of work, office type work, developed things like we got a letterhead going. We got a copy of it over there. We got a logo. We got collection guidelines. We got interview questions when you go to interview elders on tape and so on. So there's all, and eventually, after I left the presidency in 2006, we still hadn't finished our incorporation stuff. That took a little while longer under Wynn's presidency, but we eventually got that done. But we got a lot of our documentation, and I've got here a whole file of all the important documents, procedures manual, interview questions. You know, we developed all this in the first year. Amazing how much we got done. It guided the work of the various committees, the various aspects of saving the history of the island. And I have, somewhere here, if I can find it, notes from Freya.
You remember that?
We should almost frame it on the walls of the new museum. Because it's the only thing written in pencil on a lined piece of kind of oak tag paper. She was asked to do a draft of the purpose of the Historical Society from our first 2 or 3 meeting conversations. So she hand wrote this thing, handed it to me. We used it almost word for word. We did some tweaking of it, but that became our statement of purpose, which reads like this. The purpose of the Guaymas Island Historical Society is to collect, catalog, store, display, and preserve the oral histories, papers, photographs, artifacts, and any other materials that document the history of the island. Moved, seconded, and passed on October 14th that year, 2002. Yeah.
Bob, what's the status of,
I read lips so much you have to drop that just down.
what's the status of computerizing any of this?
Well, this was early on, we got a computer very early. And we've upgraded since. Are we still upgrading? We're still gonna get a new one, aren't we? Do we have to get a new one? or are
We
okay?
have, yeah, we have a couple of laptops.
So, yeah,
So notes and, this process, all those kind of things are codified in a computer, or at least copied or something in it.
well, we had a gifted, who was it gifted? I have it in my notes, but I forgot who it was. Somebody gave us a computer to start, a used computer, and then we bought our own. But we've had a computer from the beginning.
But a lot of that
these
stuff is
papers-
not been put in.
Are you,
It's just in
Tom,
limbo.
are you asking if that stuff has been scanned into
Yeah,
a computer?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of stuff
Yeah.
has, yeah. And Tom will tell you about the current digitalized.
Digitization.
We got a grant for it, okay. He's gonna tell you about that later. He's gonna pick it up from 2006 on. Okay. We early financially, we raised $140 from that first meeting on the 19th. It was the donation. That was our first treasurer. There was a couple of grants that Alex got for the work he was doing for the organizing at the beginning, where he had money, a grant to help us pay for postage and that kind of stuff, to do the first initial organizing. We started with no money at all from anywhere. And then we got an early grant from JPOA, property owner. Howard Pellet was a very strong supporter of the Historical Society and got us a small grant from the proceeds and extras of the JPOA. Then came the issue of storage space. And we had no place to put, as stuff was starting to come in, we had to hold off for a while because we didn't have any place to put it. Wynn, of course, had a lot of stuff stored with his various caches around the island and in his barn and stuff. So we thought, maybe the church. So in October of that first year, I was deputized to talk to the church, and I think you were the moderator, Julie, at that time.
And what year?
Huh?
What year?
2002?
I don't know.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
It's later.
All this we got done in that first 6 or 8 months. It was amazing. But they went to the church, church was very receptive, said, yeah, we got a closet, we were doing some renovating, I think we were building the foyer at the time, we changed these rooms, we said, yeah, we got a room here. So we've used that room ever since. And we're of course outgrowing it, now we have some space, Tom will tell you about it, his place where we're slowly moving out and storing stuff until we get our ultimate vision, some kind of a history building of some kind, okay? Okay. The idea of the dinner cruises, Tom, came up during that first year as an idea for a fundraiser. And I followed it through about a year and a half of minutes, and we finally decided to bag it for now. Just was not an idea we were going to pursue. But eventually, I'm telling you, that idea was early on the idea list we were developing of stuff we could do. Some of which got done, and some of which are still good ideas. Okay? We had regular meetings, all the rest of that year. We had a surprising presence of almost every place, the parade, any public event. We were there with the booth that first year. We knew we had to get the word out, and so we just were everywhere. We didn't miss a chance. And we did some displays at the church as well, and at the hall. And I have, in a second year, this letter of May 1st, 2003, to Ann Cady, who was the secretary at the time of the Historical Society. I am pleased to inform you that the Guaymas Island Historical Society volunteers have been nominated for the 2003 Volunteer of the Year Group Award. Alexander Dunn of the Anacortes Museum, yes, he was going to the museum, submitted your name for this group nomination. And we shared that with, I think, one other group, and I went to the meeting a little while later after that, collected a certificate for everybody who'd been a volunteer of the year. At the next meeting, gave them out to all the individuals. They had individual certificates of volunteer of the year from the Skagit County Community Action Agency, a United Way agency. So there's a piece of historical documentation that we will hang on to And, as I say, we had 3 memories nights. I don't have the third one, but here's the minutes on it. On October 13th, 2003, a year after our first meeting. We had one in October, another one in April of 2003, and then one in the fall, early October 2003. And at our meeting the week following, here were the notes in the minutes. The evening was deemed a big success. Our thanks to Alan Bush Jr. for putting the old island photos on disc, obtaining the necessary equipment, and presenting a grand program enjoyed by over 85 people. In the hour-and-a-half program ending at 8 p.m., about 23 of the 35 pictures were viewed and enjoyed. Wynn suggested publicizing the content in the future so people can be thinking about relevant information. Janice will store the extra potluck supplies. That's what appeared.
Where are
As I
those?
say, that meeting was held the week before. I have nothing in my records yet about it. And I could be some other folder that I separated them out, but they're not in the sequence of the minutes for 2003. So,
Cars beeping.
Yeah, what is that?
It's somebody's car
Somebody's
alarm.
somebody's car alarm is
No,
beeping.
not mine.
I don't have a car alarm.
well, it's not me, because I don't have a
I
cell phone.
didn't lock mine, so wouldn't be.
Or did somebody accidentally push their button on their key fob?
Did
I
it
haven't
stop?
had mine out.
No, it's still going.
So, you're thinking of coming up here, Tom, because I'm almost at the end of
Okay.
all the questions.
I'm wondering if it's mine.
Oh, one
I
of the
didn't even know I
documents
had
we have,
one.
which you want to,
Yours
which you
wasn't
want to see, is we have Laura Bassett's high school paper called The Last Potlatch on Buenos Island from 1880, and apparently it was one of the first decade of 2000.
Okay.
And we have
I
that
didn't even get to the
document.
front door.
And it's a fascinating read. If you've never read it, it's archived. I think we can probably access it on the computer, make a copy of it.
Where is it
If
archived?
not, I can make a copy of it.
Where is it archived?
I'm sorry.
Where is it archived?
With our, in our
Oh.
computer, yeah, and our records, yeah.
Yeah, that would be
But I
really
have her
interesting.
paper here, and I can just copy it for you too. But she did some research for high school, and she presented this to the, yeah. It's hard to keep all this stuff in any kind of order. But here's the paper. It's a how many pages? 9-page paper. And so it's another historical piece. We collected these various pieces and they're all
I'm getting
there.
back.
So, to summarize quickly, in that first year, really about 8 months, we did serious organization for preservation, proper archiving, written statement of purpose and mission. We developed procedure manuals for interviews, collecting, and so on. We made out an early call for memories from the island for our forums and memories nights, and did a lot of interviews, probably half a dozen that first year. Carol Harmon did a number of them. We began the incorporation under the community center, but that took a little longer than my term. And then we had regular meetings every month for that year. We have the minutes. And we developed a meeting plan whereby we would do part of the time for business and part of the time for some kind of a presentation, where Tom would do latest acquisitions, or we have a speaker in, different nights who would tell stories off the island. And I think we videoed most of them from the beginning. Tom's been good at that. And so over the years, we followed that model we established that first year, mixing business and doing some actual historical presentation. And we've had several people do excellent stories of people's family. We have the Taylor family, for example, and a lot of the families of the island. We've had their relatives here. Remember one sprightly night when Max Benjamin's daughter came and told all kinds of stories about Max that delighted us. So we've had some really delightful presentations on our regular second Monday meetings, okay? And we started to work on Native history I think triggered by Laura's paper. But my sense is we haven't made as much progress on that as maybe some other areas.
Not
of
since
our-
I've been here, no.
And maybe that's something that's a gap we ought to start taking more attention to. We put a lot of dreams out there, a lot of things that we thought we might like to do. We did dream about a historical calendar, and we did a couple of those with Carol's
Right.
Carol's help. We talked about doing a skit, some kind of a theatrical presentation. The island has a history of theatrical presentations, as you know. Maybe even rewriting a book about the island, because the one that's out there is, a lot of people said, it's not all that accurate. Road signage, I think that's where Wynn got the idea of some of the signs he's put up for Caillou Creek and so on. I think he went out now on his own. We've got a big map of the island. We talked about doing a mapping of the island of all the historical spots that could be posted. That never got off the ground, I think needs to be done. It's too bad we've lost two key people who could have contributed to that, which are Bud Strom and Jeff Gent, who had been going around the island with us and marked all the spots, but I'm sure others also could do that. We talked about a guide to our historical resources, of, the kind of thing you're asking, where is this stuff? Where do you find? And cataloging in some way that we could just hand out like the Guaymas Guide. As I said, much more on the native history of this island, which is so important. So, let me just end by saying that it's basically about stories. And the stories of Guaymas are just slightly skewed, as is, of course, to be expected on an island where people come to get away, because we're all slightly skewed or a little eccentric or not, not like the mainland. Okay? And so the stories themselves almost always are interesting. And as those of us who do any kind of historical origins research, like I do for my own family history, or I do for Mayan art, which is an interest of mine, or biblical history, we say this about any stories that come as part of our history. All of them are true. Some of them actually happened. Remember, all of them are true. Some of them actually happened.
Thank
Any
you, Bob.
questions?
Thank you, Bob.
Any questions you want to ask before we pass on to,
Janice, didn't you and Don do a real exhaustive report on natives on Guaymas also?
Yeah,
Is that part of our historical?
I think probably there is a copy of it.
It's still online time.
I read lips too much to be able to hear you well through a mask with my hearing loss.
Janice and Don Ashback did a very scholarly work on native people on Guaymas. Was it Guaymas or Skagit County? Or
We know a lot of the native peoples, the native heritage of them,
Mhm.
yeah. We've reached out to some. We have a standing offer. 2 years ago, I was on the Guaymas 98221 art tour.
Oh.
That's every year. And I went to the headquarters of the Savage people of Pio Island, talked to a gentleman, I think I gave you his name, I forgot his name now, who was doing some art there. He said, oh, I'd be glad to come over and talk about native history. We've not had him here. Maybe that's something we could do.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people we should probably have tell us that story. So, if you've got ideas for people you'd like to hear, just pass them on to any of us, and we'll, because every meeting, we're looking for something interesting to be part of our history rather than just doing business.
I haven't been on the island that long, but, well, it's been longer than I. But so I don't know some of the names or the people, it'd be fun to make a list, so I could even,
Yeah.
look at it and
Something
say,
to make a note, any notes of this, of good ideas that come out of this tonight?
Well, some of the books that we have, 2 books that I know of that have been written about two books that I know of that's been written about the island, Gertie Howard's,
Mhm.
and then, just lost her first name.
I know.
Elmore.
Oh, Helen.
Helen Elmore. And, are not very factual.
Yeah.
When I brought up Gertie Howard's to Dawn one day, we were talking, and she says, no, Julie, you don't believe Gertie Howard's book.
Well, as I said at the end, you know,
And
they're
then
all the stories are true, some of them happened, some of them are factual.
Helen wrote her book not long after she moved to the island,
Mhm.
Yeah,
so she
good.
was unaware of a lot of things.
Yeah, a long-term project would be some kind of an updated history book. Draws from them and from the stories and all the stuff we've collected. Major project, but 2 or 3 author types who like to write and are good writers could,
Mhm.
you know, could take on that project. It would be probably a 2 or 3 year project at least. So,
How much does Anacortes have in parallel to what we're doing?
Anacortes is behind Guaymas Island, you know that, don't you? We were settled before Anacortes. We had a post office here for the mail boat and all that before Anacortes, okay? They had to catch up with us. Now, they've got the museum, they've got some of our stuff there, and we have been different people have been mining the Guaymas history out of the Anacortes Museum to put in our archives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'd be interested in.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of crossover there.
Yeah, see what,
They're
Put
very
that on the list
helpful
so
over
we
there
have it,
too.
yeah. We're looking for people who have a specific interest they'd like to pursue in the history.
but especially with the natives, you know, especially with the natives people,
Yeah,
because I heard for a long time that they're pretty active on Guaymas.
yeah.
Before I heard anything about Anacortes.
I had this artist friend with me last year. We went to see the show by Dan Friday at Mona, and had some great glass art that he did. I don't see that. It was like one of their best
Yeah.
shows, and I kept promoting it on the island. And at the end was a whole section about Guaymas, and it's the pictures of the dogs of Dog Island that were used for weaving, and pictures of that. And we got the CD of that piece of the show with permission to use it from Mona. I asked specifically about that. So they graciously gave us that piece of the show. So we have that from a Mona show that did this whole piece about Dog Island that we have in our collection. I don't know where it is. You may know, but
I may.
I hope you know. Yeah. So, okay, Tom, let's continue on anyway.
Thank you, Bob.